The sea air was thick with salt as Daniel Evans trudged up the rocky path to his new home, the Blackwater Lighthouse. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a wash of purples and deep blues, and the lighthouse's beam cut through the growing darkness in steady, rhythmic sweeps. He paused for a moment to take in the sight, the towering structure looming ahead like a solitary sentinel against the encroaching night. Daniel had been looking forward to this assignment for months. The isolation, the sense of purpose, the history of the place, all of it had appealed to him. He was eager to leave behind the noise and chaos of city life for the quiet solace of the lighthouse. The previous keeper had died in an accident, or so he'd been told, and Daniel was here to take over, to keep the light burning and the ship safe. The heavy wooden door creaked ominously as he pushed it open, stepping into the cool, dim interior. The faint scent of brine and old wood greeted him, mingling with the smell of the seaweed that clung to the rocks outside. He flicked on his flashlight, the beam illuminating a narrow hallway lined with framed photographs of the lighthouse in various stages of its long history. A sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind him, causing Daniel to jump and laugh nervously at his own reaction. Shaking off the unease, he made his way further inside, eager to explore. The keeper's quarters were modest but comfortable, with a small kitchen, a living area furnished with worn but sturdy furniture, and a bedroom that offered a spectacular view of the ocean. He set his bags down and began to unpack, his movements echoing in the silence. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, though he dismissed it as nerves. This was his first night after all, and he was alone in a place with a storied past. After unpacking, he decided to take a look at the light itself. The stairs leading up to the tower were steep and narrow, each step creaking under his weight. He could hear the distant roar of the waves crashing against the rocks far below as he climbed, the sound both comforting and unsettling. At the top, the light room was warm and bright, the massive Fresnel lens turning steadily, casting its powerful beam out into the darkness. Daniel checked the mechanisms, ensuring everything was in working order. Satisfied, he stood by the window for a moment, watching the beam sweep across the water. A flash of movement caught his eye, a shadow darting across the rocks below. He squinted, trying to make out what it was, but the darkness was too thick. Probably just a trick of the light, he thought, shaking his head. It had been a long day, and his mind was playing tricks on him. Back in his quarters, he found an old journal tucked away in a drawer of the writing desk. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age. Curious, he opened it and began to read. It was the journal of Thomas Grayson, the previous keeper. Daniel's predecessor had filled the pages with meticulous notes about the lighthouse, the weather, and the ships that had passed by. But as he read further, the entries became darker, more frantic. Thomas wrote about strange noises, whispers in the wind, and a presence he could not see but felt constantly watching him. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine as he read the final, unfinished entry. They come in the night. I hear them whispering my name. I cannot leave, but I fear what will happen if I stay. The light must remain, but at what cost? God help me, The entry ended abruptly, the rest of the page blank. Daniel closed the journal, his mind racing. He glanced around the room, half expecting to see a shadowy figure lurking in the corners. But he was alone, the only sounds those of the wind and the distant waves. Shaking off the eerie feeling, he set the journal aside and prepared for bed. As he lay in the dark, the beam of the lighthouse sweeping through the windows at regular intervals, he couldn't help but wonder what had really happened to Thomas Grayson. The thought lingered as he drifted off to sleep, the sound of the sea a lullaby and a warning. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky coastline as Daniel woke, the events of the previous night lingering in his mind. He pushed aside the uneasy feelings and set about his duties, determined to immerse himself in the work. The day passed uneventfully, the rhythm of the lighthouse chores providing a comforting routine. By late afternoon, Daniel found himself once again drawn to the journal of Thomas Grayson. Settling into the worn leather armchair by the window, he opened the journal to the beginning, wanting to understand more about the man who had once stood in his place. The early entries were mundane, filled with weather reports, ship sightings, and maintenance logs. But interspersed among these were personal notes that painted a picture of a solitary, dedicated keeper. As he read, Daniel began to feel a connection to Thomas, a sense of camaraderie with a fellow keeper who had faced the same isolation and responsibility. But the entries soon took a darker turn. Thomas described hearing whispers carried on the wind, faint and indistinct at first, but growing more insistent over time. "They call my name," Thomas had written. "In the dead of night, when the wind is still and the sea is calm, I hear them. I try to tell myself it's just the wind, but deep down, I know better. There is something here, something that watches and waits." Daniel shivered, the words resonating with his own experience from the night before. He continued reading, the journal entries becoming more disjointed and frantic. Thomas wrote of shadows moving on their own, of cold spots in the lighthouse, and of a feeling of being watched. As the sun began to set, Daniel came across a sketch that made his blood run cold. It was a detailed drawing of the lighthouse, but with a shadowy figure standing in one of the windows. The figure was indistinct, more a suggestion of a human shape than a detailed image. There was an undeniable malevolence to it. He flipped the page, finding more sketches, each more unsettling than the last. Faces twisted in silent screams, dark shapes lurking in the corners of rooms, and eyes, so many eyes, watching from the darkness. Thomas's handwriting grew more erratic, the lines jagged and uneven, as if he had drawn them in a state of panic. A sudden noise from downstairs jolted Daniel from his reading. He set the journal aside and stood, listening intently. The sound came again, a faint thud followed by a scraping noise. Heart pounding, he grabbed his flashlight and descended the stairs, the beam cutting through the gathering gloom. He followed the noise to the kitchen where he found the back door swinging open, the wind howling through the gap. Daniel's heart raced as he approached the door, his flashlight revealing nothing but empty space beyond. He closed and latched the door, his mind racing with questions. Had he left it open? Or had something, or someone, opened it? Returning to the living room, he found the journal lying open on the floor, the pages fluttering as if moved by an unseen hand. He picked it up, the eerie feeling of being watched stronger than ever. Determined to find answers, he decided to explore the lighthouse further, hoping to uncover whatever secrets it held. Armed with his flashlight and a sense of resolve, Daniel made his way to the basement. The air grew colder as he descended, the stone walls damp and covered in moss. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, tools, and supplies, all coated in a thick layer of dust. As he searched, his flashlight beam fell upon an old trunk tucked away in a corner. He approached it cautiously, his breath visible in the frigid air. The trunk was heavy and ornate, its surface carved with intricate patterns. With some effort, he pried it open, revealing a collection of old books, maps, and photographs. He picked up one of the photographs, his heart skipping a beat. It was a picture of Thomas Grayson, standing proudly in front of the lighthouse, his expression serious and focused. But it was the background that caught Daniel's attention. In the window behind Thomas, the same shadowy figure from the journal sketch stood, its its features indistinct but undeniably menacing. Daniel dropped the photograph, the realization hitting him hard. Thomas hadn't been imagining things. There was something here, something that had haunted his predecessor and now seemed intent on haunting him. As he stood in the cold, dark basement, Daniel knew he was not alone. The echoes of the past were all around him, whispering their secrets and warnings. He had come to the lighthouse seeking solitude and purpose, but he had found something far more sinister. The night was closing in, and with it, the darkness that had claimed Thomas Grayson was reaching out for him. Night had fallen by the time Daniel emerged from the basement, the lighthouse's beams slicing through the darkness with unwavering regularity. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the sea air. The photograph, the journal, and the strange occurrences all weighed heavily on his mind. As he prepared a simple dinner in the small kitchen, the wind picked up outside, howling and rattling the windows. Daniel sat at the table, pushing his food around on his plate, appetite lost to the growing sense of unease. The lighthouse creaked and groaned as the wind battered it, but it was the whispers that caught his attention. At first they were so faint he thought he was imagining them, just the wind whistling through the cracks. But soon the voices grew clearer, murmuring just beyond the edge of comprehension. "Daniel." He froze, fork halfway to his mouth. The whisper was unmistakable, his name carried on the wind like a dark promise. He set the fork down, listening intently. The voice came again, more insistent this time, as if urging him to respond. "Daniel, come." His heart pounded in his chest as he stood, the whisper seeming to draw him towards the lighthouse tower. He grabbed his flashlight and made his way up the narrow stairs, each step creaking ominously under his weight. The higher he climbed, the louder the whispers became, until they seemed to echo from the very walls. At the top, he found the light room bathed in a cold, eerie glow. The massive Fresnel lens rotated steadily, casting its powerful beam out to sea. Daniel approached the window, peering out into the night. The ocean roared below, the waves crashing against the rocks with relentless fury. "Daniel." The whisper was right behind him now, so close he could feel the breath on his neck. He spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was no one there. He backed up against the window, heart racing, scanning the room for any sign of an intruder. "Who are you?" he called out, his voice shaking. "What do you want?" For a moment, the whispers ceased, replaced by an oppressive silence. Then a figure emerged from the shadows. A man, translucent and glowing with an otherworldly light. It was Thomas Grayson, his eyes hollow and filled with a sorrow that seemed to pierce Daniel's soul. "You must leave," Thomas said, his voice a mournful echo, "before it claims you too." "Leave? But I just got here," Daniel protested, his mind reeling. "What is it? What's happening?" Thomas's form flickered like a candle in the wind. "The darkness, it feeds on our fear, our despair. I tried to fight it, but it was too strong. You must go while you still can." "How do I stop it?" Daniel asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "There must be a way." Thomas shook his head, his expression grim. "I don't know. I only know that staying here will only lead to your doom as it did mine. Please, Daniel, heed my warning." With that, Thomas's form began to fade, the whispers rising once more to fill the room. Daniel stood there, breathless and trembling, as the ghostly presence vanished, leaving him alone in the cold light of the tower. The beam swept past the window again, momentarily illuminating the darkness outside, but Daniel knew that the true darkness lay within the lighthouse itself. He descended the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The whispers followed him, relentless and haunting, echoing through the narrow corridors and empty rooms. As he reached the bottom, he felt a cold draft brush past him, as if something unseen was moving through the lighthouse. Determined to find answers, Daniel made his way to the keeper's quarters, where he had left Thomas's journal. He needed to know more about what had happened, to understand the nature of the darkness that haunted this place. The journal lay open on the desk, the pages rustling as if stirred by an invisible hand. He picked it up and continued reading, the entries growing more disjointed and desperate. Thomas had described nights filled with terror, unable to escape the whispers and shadows that tormented him. He had searched for a way to break free, but the darkness seemed to tighten its grip with every passing day. As Daniel read, the temperature in the room dropped, his breath visible in the frigid air. The whispers grew louder, filling his mind with a cacophony of voices, all urging him to leave, to run, to escape the fate that had befallen Thomas. But Daniel was not ready to give up. He had come to the lighthouse seeking purpose, and he would not let the darkness drive him away. He resolved to uncover the truth, to find a way to banish the evil that haunted this place, even if it meant risking his own sanity. The night stretched on, the whispers never ceasing, but Daniel's resolve only grew stronger. He knew he was not alone in this fight. Thomas's spirit had reached out to him, a warning and a plea for help. And Daniel was determined to answer that plea, to bring light to the darkness that threatened to consume them both. The next few days passed in a haze of sleepless nights and mounting dread. The whispers continued to plague Daniel, always on the edge of his hearing, never allowing him a moment's peace. He spent his days immersed in the journal, combing through Thomas's frantic entries for any clue that might help him understand the darkness that haunted the lighthouse. One stormy evening, as the wind howled outside and the rain battered the windows, Daniel sat in the living room, the journal open on his lap. The lighthouse shuddered with each gust of wind, the beam of light cutting through the storm like a knife. The whispers seemed to intensify with the storm, swirling around him in a maddening cacophony. "Leave. Leave." He tried to ignore them, focusing instead on the words before him. Thomas had mentioned a hidden room, a place where he had felt the darkness was strongest. Daniel had yet to find any such room, but he was determined to uncover its secrets. As he read, a sudden chill swept through the room, causing the pages of the journal to flutter. The temperature dropped sharply, and Daniel's breath came out in white puffs. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, and then, abruptly, they stopped. The silence was deafening. Daniel looked up, his heart pounding. The room was plunged into an eerie calm, the only sound the distant roar of the storm. He stood, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. Something was coming. A figure materialized in the doorway, and Daniel's blood ran cold. It was Thomas, his ghostly form more solid than before. His eyes were hollow, filled with an unfathomable sorrow and terror. "Thomas," Daniel whispered, taking a hesitant step forward. "You should not have come," Thomas replied, his voice a hollow echo. "It's too late for you now." Before Daniel could respond, the temperature dropped even further, and the light in the room dimmed. A shadowy presence seeped into the room, the darkness thick and suffocating. Daniel felt a pressure on his chest, as if the air itself was pushing him down. The shadow coalesced into a form, a figure taller and more menacing than Thomas. It had no distinct features, just a mass of darkness that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, filling Daniel's mind with a chorus of voices. "You cannot escape," the shadow hissed, its voice a blend of 1,000 others. "You belong to us now." Daniel backed away, his heart pounding in his chest. The shadow advanced, its presence filling the room with an oppressive weight. He felt his strength ebbing away, his vision narrowing as the darkness closed in. Thomas's ghostly form stepped forward, placing himself between Daniel and the shadow. "You must fight," he urged, his voice strained. "You must not let it take you." Daniel struggled to gather his thoughts, to focus on something other than the overwhelming fear. He remembered the journal, Thomas's words about the hidden room. Perhaps there was something there, something that could help him. With a surge of determination, he turned and fled the room, the whispers rising to a fever pitch as he ran. He stumbled through the narrow corridors, the lighthouse seeming to twist and turn around him. The storm raged outside, the wind howling like a chorus of banshees. He reached the basement and descended the stairs, his flashlight beam flickering in the darkness. The cold was almost unbearable now, the air thick with the sense of impending doom. He searched the basement frantically, looking for any sign of the hidden room Thomas had mentioned. And then he saw it, a faint outline in the stone wall, barely visible in the dim light. He pushed against it, the wall giving way to reveal a narrow passage. The air inside was even colder, a chill that cut to the bone. He squeezed through the opening, the whispers growing louder, more desperate. The passage led to a small chamber, the walls covered in strange, archaic symbols. In the center of the room stood an altar, and on it lay a book, bound in dark leather. Daniel approached it cautiously, the air thick with an ancient, malevolent energy. He picked up the book, its pages filled with incantations and rituals. This was what Thomas had found, what had driven him to the brink of madness. But perhaps it also held the key to ending the darkness that plagued the lighthouse. As he read through the pages, the whispers grew more frantic, the darkness pressing in from all sides. He found a passage that seemed to describe a ritual to banish the spirits, to break the hold of the darkness. It required a sacrifice, a token of great personal value, and a recitation of the incantation at the stroke of midnight. Determined to see this through, Daniel made his way back to the living room, the book clutched tightly in his hands. Thomas's ghostly form awaited him, his expression one of desperation and hope. "You found it," Thomas said, his voice trembling. "You must perform the ritual. It's the only way." Daniel nodded, setting the book on the table and preparing the necessary items. Midnight was fast approaching, and he knew this was his only chance. As he readied himself, the shadowy presence returned, filling the room with its oppressive weight. "You cannot win!" it hissed, its voice a chorus of despair. Daniel steeled himself, focusing on the incantation. As the clock struck midnight, he began to recite the words, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. The shadow writhed and twisted, the whispers rising to a deafening roar. He completed the ritual, the final words echoing through the room. There was a moment of unbearable tension, and then, with a blinding flash of light, the darkness shattered. The shadowy figure dissipated, its presence vanishing into the ether. Thomas's form flickered, a look of peace crossing his features. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice fading. "You have freed us." And then he was gone, leaving Daniel alone in the silent, empty lighthouse. The storm outside began to subside, the wind dying down to a gentle breeze. The oppressive weight lifted, and for the first time since his arrival, Daniel felt a sense of peace. He knew the darkness was gone, banished by the ritual. The lighthouse stood as a beacon once more, its light cutting through the night, a symbol of hope and safety. As he looked out over the calm sea, Daniel knew he had faced the darkness and won, but he also knew he would never forget the whispers in the wind and the ghostly figure of Thomas Grayson, who had guided him through the darkest night of his life. The days that followed were mercifully quiet. The whispers had ceased, and the oppressive darkness that had haunted the lighthouse was gone. Yet, Daniel's curiosity was far from satisfied. The ritual had driven away the immediate threat, but the questions it left behind still gnawed at him. What was the source of the darkness? And why had Thomas Grayson been targeted? Determined to find answers, Daniel devoted himself to researching the lighthouse's history. He spent hours poring over old records, town archives, and any documents he could find that mentioned the Blackwater Lighthouse. The story that emerged was one of tragedy and mystery. The lighthouse had been built in the early 1800s, a beacon to guide ships safely through the treacherous waters off the coast. Over the years, it had seen its share of accidents and deaths, but none so peculiar as those that had occurred in the last few decades. Several keepers before Thomas Grayson had met untimely ends, each under strange and unexplained circumstances. One evening, Daniel decided to visit the small-town library, hoping to uncover more about the lighthouse's past. The librarian, an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a wealth of local knowledge, was eager to help. She led him to a dusty section of the library filled with old books and newspapers. As he sifted through the yellowed pages, Daniel stumbled upon a series of articles detailing the life and death of a man named Edward Blackwater, the original lighthouse keeper. Edward had been a respected figure in the town, known for his dedication and bravery. But his life had ended in tragedy when he fell from the lighthouse tower during a stormy night. His body never recovered from the churning sea. Further digging revealed that Edward's death had been shrouded in suspicion. Some townsfolk believed he had been pushed, others whispered of a curse. Daniel's interest was piqued when he discovered a diary entry from one of Edward's contemporaries, hinting at a dark secret Edward had uncovered shortly before his death. Back at the lighthouse, Daniel reviewed everything he had learned. It seemed Edward Blackwater had discovered something that had led to his death, and perhaps set off the chain of events that had cursed the lighthouse ever since. Late one night, as he sat in the living room, Daniel heard a faint sound, a distant cry carried on the wind. He froze, listening intently. The sound grew clearer, a mournful wail that seemed to come from the direction of the tower. Grabbing his flashlight, he made his way up the narrow stairs, the beam of light flickering as he climbed. At the top, the light room was cold and empty, the massive lens turning steadily. But the cries persisted, seeming to come from beyond the walls of the lighthouse itself. Daniel followed the sound to a small window, peering out into the darkness. There, on the rocks below, he saw a figure, a man standing at the edge of the cliff, staring out to sea. Daniel's heart raced as he recognized the figure from the old photographs. Edward Blackwater. The ghostly form turned slowly, its eyes meeting Daniel's with a look of profound sadness. "Help me," the figure whispered, the voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. Daniel nodded, a sense of urgency propelling him down the stairs and out into the night. The wind whipped at his clothes as he made his way to the cliffs, the beam of his flashlight dancing wildly in the darkness. When he reached the spot where he had seen the figure, he found only emptiness. The ghost had vanished. But something caught his eye among the rocks. Kneeling down, he uncovered a small, weathered box, half buried in the sand. He pried it open, revealing a collection of old letters and a diary. The letters were addressed to Edward Blackwater, written in a hurried, desperate script. As he read through the letters, Daniel pieced together a story of betrayal and murder. Edward had discovered evidence of illegal activities, smuggling, corruption, and worse, taking place under the cover of darkness. When he had confronted those responsible, They had silenced him, pushing him from the lighthouse tower and making his death look like an accident. The diary confirmed Edward's suspicions. He had detailed the smuggling operations and named those involved, hoping to bring them to justice. But his discovery had cost him his life, and his spirit had been trapped, seeking justice and peace. Daniel knew what he had to do. He took the letters and the diary to the local authorities, who were shocked by the revelations. An investigation was launched, and the truth of Edward Blackwater's death was finally brought to light. The townsfolk were horrified by the dark history that had been hidden for so long, and steps were taken to honor Edward's memory and restore the lighthouse's reputation. Back at the lighthouse, Daniel felt a sense of closure. The whispers were gone, the darkness dispelled, and the spirits at peace. As he stood in the light room, watching the beams sweep across the calm sea, he felt a connection to the past and a hope for the future. The lighthouse, once a place of terror and tragedy, had been reclaimed as a beacon of light and safety. Daniel knew his time at Blackwater Lighthouse had changed him. He had faced the darkness and uncovered the truth, bringing justice to a man who had died a century before. And as he looked out over the tranquil waters, he knew he had found his purpose. The lighthouse was his home, and he would keep its light burning, a guardian against the darkness that had once threatened to consume it. Despite the peace that followed the revelations about Edward Blackwater, Daniel soon discovered that the darkness was not entirely banished. The whispers returned, more insistent and malevolent than before. It seemed that while Edward's spirit had found some semblance of peace, the malevolent force that haunted the lighthouse was far from defeated. The first sign of the darkness's return came one evening as Daniel was making his rounds. The lighthouse was quiet, the beam of light sweeping through the darkness with steady precision. But as he climbed the stairs to the light room, he felt a chill that was all too familiar. The temperature dropped sharply, and the air grew thick with an oppressive presence. He paused on the landing, listening. The whispers began, faint at first, but growing louder and more insistent. They were no longer the mournful pleas of Edward Blackwater, but something darker, more sinister. The voices were fragmented, overlapping, creating a cacophony that made it impossible to discern any single message. Determined not to let the darkness take hold of him, Daniel pressed on. He reached the light room and checked the mechanisms, finding everything in working order. But the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever, an unseen presence that seemed to lurk in the shadows. That night, sleep was elusive. Every creak and groan of the lighthouse was magnified in the silence, the whispers seeping into his dreams, turning them into nightmares. He woke in a cold sweat, heart pounding, the darkness pressing in from all sides. The next day, Daniel decided to reach out to the local historian, a man named Harold Bennett, who had lived in the town his entire life. Harold had a wealth of knowledge about the lighthouse and its history, and Daniel hoped he might have some insight into the haunting. Harold welcomed him into his home, a quaint cottage filled with books and old photographs. As they sat by the fire, Daniel recounted his experiences, from the whispers to the ghostly apparitions and the oppressive darkness. Harold listened intently, his expression growing more grave with each passing minute. When Daniel finished, he leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. "You've uncovered a great deal about Edward Blackwater and the smuggling ring," Harold said, his voice measured. "But there's more to the lighthouse's history than just that. There have been rumors for centuries about a malevolent presence, something far older and darker than the events you've uncovered." Harold retrieved an old leather-bound book from his shelf and handed it to Daniel. The book was filled with accounts of strange occurrences, dating back to the lighthouse's construction. There were stories of mysterious deaths, unexplained disappearances, and and sightings of shadowy figures. One entry caught Daniel's attention, a passage about a dark ritual performed by the original builders of the lighthouse. According to the account, they had called upon a powerful spirit to protect the lighthouse from the harsh elements and ensure its light would never fail. But the ritual had gone awry, and instead of a benevolent guardian, they had summoned something far more sinister. The spirit they summoned was bound to the lighthouse, Harold explained, and over the years, it's fed on the fear and despair of those who lived and worked there. It's grown stronger with each tragic death, each act of violence. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. The pieces were starting to come together. The whispers, the oppressive darkness, the malevolent presence that had haunted the lighthouse for generations. He realized that the ritual he had performed to banish the spirits had only been a temporary reprieve. The true source of the darkness was still very much alive, and it would not be easily defeated. That night, as Daniel returned to the lighthouse, he felt a renewed sense of determination. He had faced the darkness before and survived, and he would do so again. But he knew he would need more than just resolve. He would need to uncover the secrets of the original ritual, to understand the nature of the spirit that haunted the lighthouse, and to find a way to banish it once and for all. The days that followed were a blur of research and preparation. Daniel scoured every available resource, looking for any mention of the original ritual and how it might be undone. He reached out to experts in the occult, seeking their advice and guidance. As he delved deeper into the dark history of the lighthouse, the haunting intensified. The whispers grew louder, the cold spots more frequent. Objects began to move on their own, doors slamming shut with violent force, and shadows flitted at the edge of his vision. Sleep became a rare luxury, each night filled with nightmares and restless tossing. One particularly stormy night, Daniel sat in the light room, surrounded by books and notes. The wind howled outside, the rain lashing against the windows. The lighthouse shuddered with each gust, the beam of light slicing through the darkness. As he pored over an old manuscript, a sense of foreboding washed over him. The whispers began again, louder and more insistent than ever. The temperature plummeted, his breath visible in the frigid air. The shadows in the room seemed to shift and coalesce, forming a dark, menacing shape. The malevolent presence was back, more powerful and determined than before. Daniel stood, facing the darkness with a mixture of fear and resolve. He knew that the final confrontation was approaching, and he would need to be prepared. "You cannot defeat me!" the shadow hissed, its voice a chilling blend of anger and malice. "I have fed on your fear, your despair. I am eternal." Daniel took a deep breath, summoning all his courage. "You may be powerful, but you're not invincible. I will find a way to stop you." The shadow laughed, a sound that sent shivers down Daniel's spine. "We shall see," it whispered, before dissipating into the darkness, leaving the room in an oppressive silence. Determined not to be defeated, Daniel returned to his research with renewed vigor. He knew that the final battle was drawing near, and he would need every ounce of strength and knowledge to banish the darkness that haunted the Blackwater Lighthouse. Daniel's research led him to an old tome hidden away in the darkest corner of the town library, a book on ancient rituals and protective incantations. The librarian had seemed reluctant to let him borrow it, warning him that its contents were obscure and dangerous. But Daniel had no choice. He needed to understand the ritual that had bound the malevolent spirit to the lighthouse and find a way to reverse it. Back at the lighthouse, Daniel pored over the book, his eyes scanning each page for any clue that might help him. The text was dense and difficult to decipher, filled with archaic symbols and cryptic instructions, but slowly a plan began to take shape in his mind. The original ritual had involved a powerful sacrifice, a life offered to bind the spirit to the lighthouse. To undo it, Daniel would need to perform a counter-ritual, one that would sever the spirit's connection and release it from its earthly tether. The key, he realized, was in the symbols that had been carved into the walls of the hidden chamber beneath the lighthouse. They were the same symbols described in the tome, part of an ancient language used to commune with the spirit world. Daniel spent days meticulously copying the symbols, learning their meanings and the incantations that accompanied them. He also needed something of great personal value for the ritual, a token imbued with emotional significance. After much thought, he decided on his father's old pocket watch. It had been a gift from his mother, a cherished memento of his parents who had both passed away. The watch was one of the few possessions he had brought with him to the lighthouse, a reminder of his family and the life he had left behind. The night of the ritual was chosen carefully, a night when the moon was full and the tides were high, aligning with the conditions described in the ancient text. Daniel prepared everything meticulously, setting up the symbols and gathering the necessary items in the hidden chamber. The air was thick with anticipation, the lighthouse eerily silent except for the distant crash of the waves. As midnight approached, the whispers began again, louder and more insistent than ever. The temperature in the chamber dropped sharply, the oppressive darkness pressing in from all sides. Daniel felt the presence of the malevolent spirit, watching, waiting. With trembling hands, he placed the pocket watch on the altar and began to recite the incantation. The words were foreign and strange on his tongue, but he spoke them with conviction, pouring all his focus and determination into each syllable. The symbols carved into the walls began to glow faintly, a soft, pulsating light that filled the chamber. The darkness reacted violently, swirling around him in a frenzy, the whispers rising to a deafening roar. Daniel struggled to keep his focus, his voice shaking but unwavering. He repeated the incantation, his words growing louder, more forceful. Suddenly, the pocket watch on the altar began to glow, its light intensifying with each word. The darkness seemed to recoil, the whispers faltering. Daniel felt a surge of hope, redoubling his efforts. The light from the watch grew brighter and brighter, illuminating the chamber in a brilliant, blinding radiance. And then, with a final powerful word, the light exploded outward, a wave of energy that washed over the room, dispelling the darkness. The whispers ceased, the oppressive weight lifting from Daniel's chest. The malevolent presence was gone, the connection severed. Breathing heavily, Daniel collapsed to his knees, the pocket watch now dark and lifeless on the altar. The symbols on the walls faded, the chamber returning to its cold, dark state. But the air felt different, lighter, free of the malevolence that had haunted it for so long. Exhausted but victorious, Daniel made his way back to the living room. He felt a profound sense of relief and triumph, knowing he had faced the darkness and won. The lighthouse was silent, peaceful, the beam of light sweeping steadily through the night. In the days that followed, Daniel sensed a change in the lighthouse. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a calm, serene energy. The whispers had ceased, the shadows no longer held any menace. The lighthouse had been cleansed, the malevolent spirit banished. Daniel knew he had fulfilled his purpose, bringing light to the darkness that had plagued the lighthouse for centuries. As he stood in the light room watching the beam cut through the night, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction and peace. The Blackwater Lighthouse was once again a beacon of hope and safety, its dark past finally laid to rest. But Daniel also knew that he could not stay. The lighthouse needed a new keeper, someone unburdened by its haunted history. As he packed his belongings, preparing to leave, he felt a mixture of sadness and pride. He had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, and now it was time to move on. As he closed the door of the lighthouse behind him, Daniel looked back one last time. The beam of light shone brightly, a symbol of resilience and hope. He knew that wherever he went, he would carry the memory of the Blackwater Lighthouse with him, a testament to the power of courage and determination in the face of darkness. Daniel's triumph over the malevolent spirit should have brought peace to the Blackwater Lighthouse, but his victory was short-lived. As he prepared to leave, something gnawed at him, a sense that the story was incomplete. His final night at the lighthouse was calm, the beam of light cutting through the darkness with a steady, reassuring rhythm. Yet, as the hours passed, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had overlooked something crucial. Early the next morning, Daniel received an unexpected visitor, Harold Bennett, the local historian. Harold looked anxious, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a sense of urgency. He had discovered something in his own research that he needed to share with Daniel immediately. "I found more about the original ritual," Harold said, his voice tinged with worry. "It turns out there's a second part to the story, something I didn't see before. The ritual you performed might have only been a temporary fix." Daniel felt a cold knot of dread in his stomach. "What do you mean?" Harold handed him a bundle of old letters and documents. "These are correspondences between the builders of the lighthouse and a group of occultists who were involved in the original summoning. Seems there was a betrayal among them. One of the builders was promised power and immortality in exchange for binding the spirit here. The malevolent presence wasn't just a mistake, it was intentional." Daniel's heart sank as he read through the letters. The betrayal was clear. The builder had used the ritual to secure his own power, trapping the spirit and using the lighthouse as a focal point for dark energies. This revelation cast a sinister shadow over everything Daniel thought he had accomplished. "The spirit isn't just any spirit," Harold continued. "It's the builder himself, cursed by his own greed and treachery. The only way to truly free the lighthouse is to confront him directly and break the curse at its source." As the full weight of the revelation sank in, Daniel realized that his battle was far from over. The darkness had been temporarily banished, but the root of the evil remained. The lighthouse's history was steeped in betrayal, and it was up to him to set things right once and for all. Determined to face the spirit of the treacherous builder, Daniel returned to the hidden chamber beneath the lighthouse. The oppressive atmosphere had returned, the air thick with a palpable sense of malevolence. He could feel the presence of the spirit, waiting, watching. As he approached the altar, the temperature dropped sharply, and the shadows in the room seemed to come alive, swirling around him in a frenzy. The whispers returned, louder and more chaotic than ever. "Leave this place. You cannot defeat me." Daniel steeled himself, drawing upon the strength he had found during the previous confrontation. "I know who you are," he said, his voice steady. "I know what you did." A shape began to form in the darkness, a tall, imposing figure with eyes that glowed with an unnatural light. The spirit of the builder, twisted and corrupted by his own greed and betrayal, stood before him, radiating a powerful aura of malevolence. "You think you can challenge me?" The spirit hissed, its voice a blend of anger and disdain. "I am bound to this place by my own will. You cannot undo what has been done." Daniel held up the letters and documents, his hands shaking slightly. "These letters tell the truth. You betrayed your own and you were cursed for it. But it's time to end this. You don't have to be trapped here forever." The spirit recoiled, its form flickering as if struggling to maintain its shape. "Lies!" It spat, though there was a hint of uncertainty in its voice. Daniel took a step forward, his resolve unwavering. You were promised power and immortality, but all you received was torment and darkness. It's time to break the curse. Release your hold on this place and find peace." The spirit's eyes flared with anger, and it lunged at Daniel, the room filling with a whirlwind of darkness. But Daniel stood his ground, clutching the pocket watch, his token of personal value, and the letters that revealed the truth. He began to recite an incantation from the old tome, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. As he spoke, the symbols on the walls began to glow once more, the light pushing back against the darkness. The spirit screamed, a sound of pure anguish and fury, its form flickering and distorting. The power of the curse was weakening, the bonds that held it to the lighthouse unraveling. With a final desperate cry, the spirit surged forward, but Daniel held firm, the incantation reaching its climax. The light from the symbols intensified, filling the chamber with a brilliant, blinding radiance. The spirit let out a final, agonized scream before it was consumed by the light, its presence dissolving into nothingness. The chamber fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. The symbols faded, the glow dissipating as the curse was broken. Daniel collapsed to the floor, exhausted but victorious. The lighthouse was finally free from the darkness that had plagued it for so long. In the days that followed, the change was palpable. The lighthouse stood as a beacon of hope and safety once more, its dark history finally laid to rest. The whispers were gone, the shadows held no menace, and the oppressive weight had lifted. The town honored Edward Blackwater and acknowledged the dark past, but they also celebrated the lighthouse's new chapter. Daniel knew his work was done. As he packed his belongings and prepared to leave, he felt a sense of pride and closure. The Blackwater Lighthouse would continue to stand, a symbol of resilience and light in the face of darkness. And though he would move on, Daniel would carry the memory of his time there with him, a testament to the power of truth and the strength of the human spirit. As he walked away from the lighthouse for the last time, the beam of light sweeping steadily through the night, Daniel knew he had found his purpose. The darkness had been defeated, the betrayal uncovered, and the lighthouse restored. His journey had been long and arduous, but he had emerged victorious, a guardian of the light in a world that often seemed shrouded in shadows. The sense of triumph that Daniel felt after breaking the curse was short-lived. Even as the town began to acknowledge the lighthouse's new chapter, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was still amiss. The calm was too fragile, the silence too heavy. The darkness had been vanquished, but not defeated. Daniel knew in his bones that the final confrontation was yet to come. It was a quiet evening when the lighthouse's calm facade began to crack. The sun had set, leaving the sky a canvas of deep blues and purples, the lighthouse beam cutting through the gathering darkness. Daniel was packing his belongings, preparing to leave the next day, when he heard a faint, familiar whisper. "You cannot leave." His blood ran cold. The voice was not the chaotic, overlapping whispers of before, but a single, malevolent presence. The spirit of the builder, though weakened, was not entirely gone. It had been hiding, waiting for a moment of vulnerability. Determined to face the final challenge head-on, Daniel grabbed the tome, the letters, and the pocket watch, and made his way to the hidden chamber beneath the lighthouse. The air grew colder with each step, the walls closing in around him. The chamber, once a place of hope and resolution, now felt like a tomb. As he entered, the darkness surged forward, coalescing into the figure of the builder. The spirit's eyes glowed with a terrible light, its form more solid and threatening than ever. "You think you can defeat me?" The spirit hissed, its voice dripping with venom. "You are nothing compared to the power I wield." Daniel stood his ground, the tome clutched tightly in his hands. "You've lost your power. You were cursed by your own greed, and now it's time to end this." The spirit laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. "You may have broken the curse, but I still remain. As long as this lighthouse stands, I will haunt it. You cannot banish me." Daniel's mind raced, searching for a solution. The ritual had severed the spirit's connection, but it hadn't destroyed it. He needed something more, a way to force the spirit out of this world entirely. Suddenly, an idea struck him. The lighthouse was the source of the spirit's power, the anchor that kept it tethered to this world. If he could destroy the anchor, he could banish the spirit once and for all. It was a drastic measure, but he saw no other way. "You're right," Daniel said, his voice steady. "I can't banish you, but I can destroy the lighthouse." The spirit recoiled, its form flickering. "No, you wouldn't dare!" Daniel took a step forward, his resolve unwavering. "This lighthouse has stood for too long as a beacon of darkness. It's time to bring it down." With a surge of determination, Daniel turned and ran up the stairs, the spirit's screams echoing behind him. He reached the light room, the powerful beam sweeping through the night. With a heavy heart, he began to dismantle the mechanisms, tearing out the wires and breaking the gears. The light flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. The lighthouse shuddered, the very walls seeming to groan in protest. The spirit appeared before him, more desperate and furious than ever. "You fool! You will destroy us both!" Daniel ignored the spirit's rage, his focus unwavering. He moved methodically, breaking and smashing everything he could find. The lighthouse trembled, the foundation cracking under the strain. As the building began to collapse, Daniel felt a strange sense of peace. He had done what needed to be done. The darkness would finally be vanquished, the spirit banished forever. He stumbled out of the collapsing structure, the ground shaking beneath his feet. Outside, the townsfolk had gathered, watching in horror and awe as the lighthouse crumbled. Daniel fell to his knees, exhausted and battered but victorious. The spirit's final scream echoed through the night, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage, before it was silenced forever. The lighthouse fell, a cascade of stone and wood crashing to the ground. The beam of light, once a symbol of hope and fear, was no more. The darkness had been defeated, the curse lifted. In the days that followed, the town came together to honor the lighthouse and its keepers. A new beacon was built, smaller but brighter, a symbol of resilience and hope. Daniel was hailed as a hero, but he felt no need for recognition. He had done what needed to be done, and that was enough. As he prepared to leave the town for good, Daniel looked back one last time at the ruins of the lighthouse. The sky was clear, the sea calm. The new beacon shone brightly, a promise of a better future. Daniel smiled, knowing that the darkness had been banished, and the Blackwater Lighthouse would stand as a beacon of hope and safety once more. With a final glance, he turned and walked away, ready to face whatever challenges the future might hold. He had defeated the darkness, uncovered the betrayal, and restored the light. The final confrontation was over, and Daniel Evans was ready for a new beginning.